This is Christian Book Blurb, brought to you by author and songwriter Matt McChlery. Get a behind-the-scenes glimpse into the lives of some of your favourite Christian authors. Hear about their books and faith. Also, why not check out my website, mattmcclery.com. Hello and a Merry Christmas to you, and welcome to this episode of the Christian Book Blurb, where we like to encourage you in your discipleship one book at a time as we meet some amazing Christian authors and learn about their books, their lives, and their faith. Thanks for joining me today. I am your host, Matt McChlery, and on today's show, I'm going to be talking about Christmas carols, very appropriate for the season, with our special guest author, Gordon Giles. Hello, Gordon. Welcome to the show.
Hello everybody.
Thank you so much for joining us today. You have written a wonderful new book for this Christmas time called A Calendar of Carols, and it's kind of like, well, I see it as an advent calendar without the chocolate, but with something even better inside. You take us through a whole variety of different Christmas carols, sort of one day at a time throughout December in the lead up to Christmas. What inspired you to write it?
It is what it says on the tin, really. I mean, it's interesting how you said it's an advent calendar without the chocolate. That is sort of true. There is one of the carols is called What Sweeter Music. So there is some sweet music in there, and that's a carol by John Rutter, Sir John Rutter, as he now is, bless him. So it is what it says on the tin, in the sense of it is a daily romp, but also with a quiet spiritual dimension as well, through the carols that we know and love, and some carols that we perhaps are not so familiar with, but which have really quite deep spiritual meaning. I mean, the word carol has been used in so many ways, and of course not all carols are Christmas carols. There are Easter carols as well, but it's a kind of cover-all word, isn't it, for the kind of the songs that get sung at Christmas, whether that's We Wish You a Merry Christmas or Hark the Herald Angels Sing, some of which are great hymns, and some of which we probably wouldn't call We Wish You a Merry Christmas a hymn. But carol kind of covers it all, isn't it? It's a kind of cover-all term. But the one of the key themes of the book, if you like, the overarching theme, is that during December we are in Advent. Churchgoers know that, but a lot of non-churchgoers don't know that. Or if they do know that, it is, as you say, about chocolate.
The chocolate calendar, yeah.
Yeah, or coffee, or tea bags, or whatever it is that people have.
Depends how posh you want to get. Yes, that's right.
Exactly. You could spend a lot of money on Advent calendars these days. Yeah. And it's not Advent, it's the run-up to Christmas, and it culminates on day 24, usually. And I remember when I was a kid, it was cardboard, and you opened a picture, and there was a picture of Jesus in the manger, and that was it. Whereas now it's all Advent is supposed to be a sort of penitential season, really, but chocolate doesn't really. Anyway, I love chocolate. Don't get me wrong. But anyway, so the idea is it sort of combines the idea of the run up to Christmas with Advent, which is, of course, what we're doing all the time in December. We are hearing Christmas carols. Classic FM starts its Christmas carols on December the 1st, and then it kind of really winds down after Christmas. They usually just about make it to New Year. But, Christmas for many people stops at the end of December, when really, liturgically speaking, the Christmas season actually starts on Christmas Eve and goes all the way through to February the 2nd. People don't buy that these days. That's not how people live through Christmas.
There's a curious mix now, isn't there?
It is, and that's the kind of double thing. And we're speaking two languages at once. We're speaking the language of the run-up to Christmas and the language of Advent. And they are different.
But your book kind of bridges both camps in a way.
That's the idea. That's the idea.
Yeah. No, good. All right. So, for me, and I'm sure a lot of other listeners as well, Christmas, it wouldn't be Christmas without music. I mean, what is Christmas without music?
What is life without music?
What is life without music? Indeed, indeed. And in your introduction, you note that the beginnings of Christmas as we know it today was an interesting phrase that you used. What do you mean by this, and how did Christmas as we know it actually begin?
Well, again, it's this double thing, isn't it? Christmas, of course, is the birth of Jesus in a manger in Bethlehem just over 2,000 years ago. Of course, that's Christmas. No one would argue with that. But we do have a lot to thank Mr. Charles Dickens for. Many people may not know that he decided in the 1850s, 40s, that he would try and revive harvest. And he wrote an opera about harvest, which, funnily enough, we don't know because it clearly wasn't much good and it was a complete flop. He then turned his mind to Christmas. And he wrote a book which we've all heard of called Christmas Carol, which was published on December the 19th. I know this because it's my birthday, December the 19th, 1853. And it was around the same time that the postage stamp was invented and the first Christmas card was sent. But it was also the time that many of the first Christmas carols were written, and Cooking Wenceslas and so on. They date from this sort of time. Okay. And many of those carols are kind of, they're not fake, but they hark back. So Dickens gave us the Christmas as we know it. There is in fact a film called The Man Who Invented Christmas, which is about the story, not so much the story of A Christmas Carol with Ebenezer Scrooge and Bob Cratchit, but the story of how it came to be and how Dickens managed to capture the imagination of a nation and an age and turned Christmas into a festival of kindness.
Also, at that same time, didn't the Christmas tree make an appearance
as
well, round about there?
Yes, that was Prince Albert. A couple of years earlier, he introduced a Christmas tree with candles on it. It was a very dangerous thing to do, really. But that had come from Germany, of course, so it wasn't new in Germany, but because Prince Albert was German. So you've got in that kind of 1840s, 1850s period, the arrival of what we might say Christmas as we know it. And we still do it. We hark back to it.
It was almost like this perfect storm, really, in a way, where all these different elements kind of happened round about roughly the same time. And this new thing called Christmas, as we celebrate it today, kind of was born in a way.
Yes, and of course it was associated with revelry, with eating and drinking, but also of kindness, because reflecting on the poor. I mean, Cooking Wenceslas is a wonderful example. It's not really a Christmas carol. It's actually a song that invokes people to be kind to one another. John Mason Neale, who wrote it, that was his intention, was to encourage people to think of others at Christmas, which we almost take for granted now. And if you look at the journey of Christmas since then to now, what's left? It's kind of the goodwill and kindness, and think about the homeless that is still very strong at Christmas time, when actually the story of the birth of Jesus is perhaps less prominent than it perhaps was. But we hold all these things together, and that's what we do at Christmas. We hold it all together, and we have to speak at least two languages, the secular language and the spiritual language, if you like, the biblical language and the sociological language. And it's all in this great melting pot of Christmas. And I think it's really important as Christians, as the church, as believers, not to sort of have this idea of, let's cling on to Christmas and try and keep it spiritual and turn our backs on everything else that's going on, because actually that's a place of engagement, that's a place of mission, that's a place of developing spirituality. And actually Christmas, what other time of year do we hear religious songs sung in our high streets for a month?
Yeah, I was going to say, I find Christmas, people are much more open to talking about faith and Jesus, because as you said earlier, Christmas is Jesus being born, and people can't really say, oh, well, that's got nothing to do with it. So it kind of gives you that way in a way, to actually start conversations and things.
You can't take Christ out of Christmas. If you take Christ out of Christmas, you get M&S. You know, he's in there, and he's here to stay. That's what's so good. I don't think we're going to lose Christmas in the near future. No. We did. Christmas was cancelled, wasn't it, a couple of years ago, famously, COVID and all that, and people got so upset about it. And I think Christmas is here to stay. But times change, and we as Christians we need to go with the flow a bit. Otherwise, we just get left out in the cold.
You're talking about A Christmas Carol as being a starting point for sort of the modern day version of Christmas that we all know and love. There have been so many different versions and adaptations and film versions and TV versions and everything else of this famous story that Dickens originally wrote. Do you have a particular favorite version of the Christmas Carol?
Oh gosh, I don't spend my life watching the Christmas Carol, but a lot of people do the wry smile of the Muppets version.
I was going to say that's my favourite version.
Oh, right, well, there you go.
Yeah. Let's come back to your book and talk about a calendar of carols. And because it looks at carols in quite some depth and gives some lovely insights and history behind the songs that we know and love, I would love to talk about a few of them if we can. And as today is the 15th of December, that's when this podcast goes live, I would like to look at day 15, today's actual carol. And it's got to be one of my favourite carols. It's called Hark, the Herald Angels Sing. Can you tell us a little bit about the story behind this carol?
Okay, as with any carol, there are always two stories to tell, and that's what I love about carols. There's the story of the words and the story of the music, and it is a kind of marriage. And often with hymns, the marriage between the music and the words would never have been dreamed of, or even approved of sometimes, by the people who were involved. Dear Lord and Father of Mankind is another example. Both the composer of the music and of the words were dead by the time that hymn got created, and it's extremely likely that neither of them would have approved. Herald is similar. I think Mendelssohn, who wrote the tune, would not have approved. He actually said that the music was not appropriate for a religious context. The music was written for a kind of oratorio all about Gutenberg, the printer, who was, this great German hero.
Yeah,
I know, who he extols in a cantata. So the tune, of course, which is called Mendelssohn after him, sort of to add insult to injury, really, is a storming tune. And of course, it has those top E's for the chorus, Hark, the Herald Angels Sing. A lot of people can't get up there, but it is a great con belto hymn, and it's a hymn. It's not a carol; it's a hymn, and it's a hymn because the words were originally in the start of their journey were by Wesley, of course, but other people edited them, added to them. George Whitefield played with them, and Wesley was furious. He didn't want that to happen. So what we sing 3 verses of, is actually 6 verses of 4-line verses, effectively. But we've now got 8-line verses and a chorus. Various people have had a hand in it and created what we know and love. And in one sense, I don't know if I were Wesley or Mendelssohn, whether I'd be cross or not. I mean, I think they have grounds to be cross because both of them disapproved of what was being done. On the other hand, this is you can't have Christmas without this carol, can you? A carol service has to sort of end with it, really. And and on the organ you get the trumpet stops out, or you get a brass quartet to join in. It's just it's a storming carol. And what's really good about it, of course, is that unlike some of the things we sing at Christmas, it has really strong theological groundings. Born that man no more may die. It says it all. It is a wonderful statement of theological virtue, really. It began, hark how the welkin rings, glory to the King of Kings, peace on earth and mercy mild, God and sinners reconciled. So you can see where it comes from. The welkin meant the heavens. There was a kind of older English word for the skies, the heavens. And it's evolved. It really is a hymn that's evolved. But then it got cemented. And it got cemented, 150 years ago or so, if not longer, into something that you can't change it now. And this is something that we sometimes come across, isn't it? Is people try to inclusivize carols or whatever. They don't like the word men in a carol or something like that. And then somebody changes it. And then the national press take an interest in things like that, which is also very interesting because the national press will take an interest if someone tries to change a Christmas carol.
Yeah, it's interesting how songs have kind of been through that sort of transition and people changing it, but now it's kind of fixed. And if you try and change it today to something slightly else, something different, everyone gets terribly upset. It's interesting. And at what point does it become this sort of set in stone? It's I don't know. And maybe that's a discussion for another podcast.
No,
but
it is.
It's just
Silent Night is a similar one. Silent Night is we sing 3 verses of Silent Night, and if you look at hymn books, the version of Silent Night in each one will be slightly different because Joseph Moore, who wrote the words, there were 6 verses, And if you think about the tune of Silent Night, which is basically the same as what Franz Gruber wrote in 1818, had 6 verses. It was a lot quicker and it was a bit more lyrical. But it's a long sing, 6 verses of that. And the verses, they don't translate that well. And what we have is most people, the various translators over the years, have created a sort of 3-verse version, either translating, not translating each of the verses, but creating 3 verses out of 6. And in fact, in the book, what I've done is I've translated the verses, so you could have a 6-verse version. But I'm not really recommending anybody sing 6 verses of the kind of modern tune, because we'd be there all night. It would be a very silent night. We'd all fall asleep.
Speaking of translations slightly altering the text, that brings me to talk about another hymn that you have on day 22 in your calendar, which is A Holy Night. And you point out that this carol lays claim, in the UK at least, to being the nation's favourite Christmas carol. And I must admit, it is one of my favourites as well. Why do you think this carol in particular is so popular?
I think it has to be the tune, and the tune is just amazing. I've accompanied singers singing it, so I've played it on the piano, as it were. When you realise how well constructed it is, what a Adolphe Adam, who was an opera composer, he really knew what he was doing. It's a bit like an operatic aria, and many of the recordings that people know and love are sung by opera singers. It has just an amazing arch of melody, and of course it's more popular in the English translation than in the French, not leastly because the French one is really quite hard-hitting about sin and atonement and judgment and punishment and so on. The English version is not a literal translation, and it has that lovely kind of, like with the animals kneeling in prayer, it has that Thomas Hardy, St. Francis at the crib type approach of, all nature is coming to worship the King of Kings who has been born for us. But it doesn't labour on the sin side. Dwight, who wrote the words in English, who sort of translated it, but again, it's not a translation, it's more of an English version. The words are a bit saccharine at times, and the tune is too, and people love that, and it is an amazing song, so it doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, Silent Night is the other one that people love, which also is very, very lyrical, and it just has that kind of emotional feel to it that gives people comfort. But in O Holy Night, there is that rise of the melody as it the climax in it. It's just perfectly pitched.
And something else you pointed out in the book is that, unlike a lot of carols, this one, yes, it's not as hard-hitting as the original version, but it's still pretty in your face when it says, fall on your knees. It's really sort of commanding a response from those singing it and listening to it. Fall on your knees and worship, rather than, let's just think about pretty thoughts. There's a challenge to it still, which I find really interesting as well.
There is an instruction, as you say, the babe of Bethlehem is the Son of God, is God incarnate. Get down on your knees and notice. However, perhaps a bit controversial, I don't think that's why it's popular.
No.
I think people perhaps don't always notice that. I mean, but it is, as you say, it is there. And this is a thing with all Christmas carols, and in fact all hymns. We are so good at singing hymns, worship songs, carols, whatever, without really paying attention to what we're singing. And there's a kind of concept in liturgy, lex credendi, lex orandi, or the other way around, lex orandi, lex credendi. What they say, they believe. What they believe is what they say. So if do we believe what we're singing? But if we keep singing it, we end up believing it. And this is why hymns and carols are so important and so influential and so powerful, because the story of Christmas that people know comes more from away in a manger than it does from Luke chapter 2. And that could be a problem, if you see what I mean, because, this is precisely why Fanny Alexander wrote Once in Royal David City, was to teach the tenets of the faith. It comes from her Hymns for Little Children, which she wrote in 1843, I think, off the top of my head, of hymns each one relating to a point of the creed. So all things bright and beautiful is I believe in God the Father, creator of the world. There is a green hill far away is Jesus crucified under Pontius Pilate. Once in David's city is the incarnation, born of the Virgin Mary. But of course, what she did, and again, we're talking 200 years ago, we're talking about the beginnings of Christmas as we know it, as we said earlier. She introduces, all Christian children all must be mild, obedient, good as he. There's a Victorian thing going on there. The other thing that's going on in that carol is infant mortality, because half of children born at that time did not live. And so parents, their white-robed children were their children that they had lost in childbirth or soon after. And there's a one that Penny Alexander wrote about children visiting the graves of their lost friends. It's very poignant, very moving. And when you sing that hymn and when you read those verses and sing them about, the children going to heaven, this was real. This is not the world we live in now. But this is what she was trying to do in all those songs, but particularly Once in David City, was to teach the story of Christmas to little children. And we're all children at Christmas in a way, aren't we?
Yeah. It brings out the child in a lot of us, yes. There are 25 carols in your book, A Calendar of Carols. And there's one that I think we must look at in this when we have this discussion now, and it's called the Camel Carol. Now, I hadn't come across it before, and then as I read it a bit further, I was like, okay, I see, because it's one that you have written. Where did the inspiration come from for this more modern carol?
Well, I'm very lucky, really. I have a very good friend for a few years now who lives within walking distance from where I do in Rochester in Kent, and he's a very fine organist, a very fine composer. He's actually the composer of a thing called Funny Song, which is a widely, massively downloaded, silly song that people have used for their dog and cat videos on TikTok and what have you. But it's a global sensation, this Funny Song. I met him, he played the organ at a service I did, and we both heard of each other. And then I got on a train, and there he was, and we got chatting, and we've been friends ever since. And he writes music, and he writes music in different ways for different kind of purposes. He writes film music, he writes music for adverts. Like he did the Samsung advert for one of the foldable phones not long ago. But he also writes, he's a serious composer, and he writes anthems and so on. So we have written anthems together and text, and we just hit it off, and we understand each other. And he himself has written a few lyrics for some of the things he's done. So he really cares about words and poetry and how the words work and the meanings. And I'm a musician as well, so I understand when we talk about, will that word actually work on that note? It's a kind of slightly geeky conversation that we can have, and we write together. So it's not a case of me writing some words and him writing some music that sets them. It's more a case of he has an idea for a tune, and then I write some words, and then it develops together. And because we live so close to each other, we can meet up and do these things together, which is a great joy, I have to say. And we wrote the Camel Carol. We've also written a thing called the Funny Snowman. You might want to look that up. That's a kind of Ginger Rogers type sort of dance number. So we're doing a whole range of things. But the Camel Carol was written last year, 2023. We thought we'd do a carol. And I said, well, I tell you what, no one has ever done a carol from the perspective of the camels. We've got Christmas carols that talk about the ox and the ass and the donkey and so on. But no one's ever... The camels, they've been ignored. They're the Cinderellas of the Christmas story, in a way. So I just thought we could do this. And then the camels, they have this kind of strange gait, they lurch from side to side, so therefore you don't want a 4-square rhythm, you need an unbalanced one, which is why we settled on 7 beats in a bar, 3 plus 4 and so on, so that it kind of lurches along. And then I just had this idea about it was that they've got the hump. I know, well, exactly, and the camels have got the hump, haven't they? They literally have got the hump, and they've only got one hump, they haven't got 2, because the Middle East, they'd only have one hump. And I just thought we could just have 3 camels, and they sort of personified, and of course you could neatly avoid the question about were there three wise men or three magi or three kings or whatever you want to call them, and that was Origen's fault, the theologian who said that because there were three gifts, there must have been three gift bearers. But it doesn't say that in the Bible. But there were three gifts. There was gold, frankincense, and myrrh, and therefore each camel can be carrying the gift and the person that brings it as well. And they, camels are notoriously, miserable, and they, you don't want to get spat at by a camel. So I got these miserable camels trudging across the desert. Where are we going? What are we doing? What's all this all about? Kind of thing. We got the hump. But then, of course, they arrive with their three gifts, and the three gifts are gold, frankincense, and myrrh. But the other thing I did is I connected each gift to faith, hope, and love, because in one sense, these are the gifts that Jesus brings us. And in fact, Tommy and I wrote another carol called Onward We Go, which is a lovely children's carol. I say that because the music is lovely, and which is all about children going to Bethlehem to show Jesus their love. And then when they get there, Jesus shows them his love. And it is this kind of, not reversal, but we get back more than we give. A bit like in the Bleak Midwinter, what can I give him? I give him, myself. But actually, we receive far more than we give. And that's a Christmas idea, isn't it? As it is in giving that we receive, as St. Francis. Well, so it's not St. Francis. He didn't actually write that prayer. But anyway, that's another story. But, it is in giving that we receive. And the camels, they are converted on the journey, if you like. They get it. They go through the valley of death, as in Psalm 23, with the myrrh, which is representative of death. They go through the valley of death and they arrive. And then they kind of get it. They understand. And the reason we wrote it is we wrote it for sort of choral societies. This is not something that congregations are going to sing. It's in 4 parts. It's in seven beats in a bar. It's not easy to sing, but it's not too hard. Various choral societies and choirs have done it, and we like to think, and people tell us, that choirs love singing it because it's meaningful, but it's a bit silly as well, and it brings a smile. Actually, last year we did it. I don't know if I want to tell people this. We did it. The Cathedral Choir in Rochester sang it, and Tommy and I got inside the pantomime camel costume and walked down the aisle in this costume. So the camel walked in, and we lurched down the aisle together. We do have the costume. If anyone wants to borrow it, get in touch. So it just created it was new, it was different, it was light-hearted, but with a message. And I think to some extent that sums up what Christmas is for the church these days. We've got to be serious-minded about what we're saying and what it means and the significance for the world. But actually, you can have fun at Christmas. Why not? That's okay. People eat chocolate and they eat too much food, and the average person puts on the weight of a newborn baby at Christmas, apparently, 8 pounds. It's what people do. We can't stop it. If you can't beat them, join them. But actually then try and say, well, actually, there's something meaningful going on here, and you might like to think about it.
Another great thing you've got in your book, right in the back of your book, A Calendar of Carols, you've got all the carols in the book, along with a YouTube link so people can actually go and listen. So if you are intrigued by the Camel Carol that we've just been talking about, you can watch that on YouTube and have a listen. And I'm sure it's also available on all sorts of other musical platforms out there like Spotify and iTunes and all the others as well. Yeah. So do go and check out, hopefully, your new favorite Christmas carol or song maybe this year, something for you to discover, the Camel Carol. Now,
the other thing that's in the back of the book, if I might just get a little plug
yes,
in,
please do.
Is there's also a little thing I did, which people might like for the Christmas Carol services. It's just something a bit different. Is the telling of the Christmas story. I've called it the Story of Glory, and it's just in the back as a kind of appendix, really. The Story of Glory is the telling of the Christmas story, where every single word, except one use of the word "and," is a line or a phrase from a Christmas Carol.
Wow, well done. That must have
so
been
I know it was great
quite
fun
something
to
put together.
It kind of, I think it works, but it's a bit of fun, but it tells a story, and I know people have Christmas carol services and concerts and so on, and it just might be helpful to people as a different way of telling the story that tells the story, if you see what I mean. Yeah, and people can play a kind of game like, where's that line from? Oh, I recognise that phrase.
That's good. And of course, 25 days in December leading up to Christmas Day itself, which means there was only space for 25 carols. And there are a lot of carols out there. There might have been an extra one that you've snuck in to the back, maybe 26. But what made you choose these carols? Why these ones? Are these your particular favorites, or were these like the most interesting with interesting backstories? What helped you decide which carols made it into your calendar?
I was going to say yes. all of the above. Some carols, okay, some carols have to be in there. We wanted to put in the top 10, the ones that people think are the top 10, because people are saying, "Oh, why it's not in there?" So I hope we got this right. Your favourite carol should be in there, whether your favourite carol is "O Holy Night" or "Silent Night" or "Hark the Herald" or "Once in Royal." You know, the big hitters are in there. Some carols have wonderful stories that go behind them. Some carols have stories that go behind them, but they're not true, like the story of Silent Night. It's just nonsense, it's just made up. Other carols have, the story of O Holy Night is quite interesting, as readers will discover about, the stories of the two people that wrote it. I wanted to include one by Sir John Rutter, I know, and wanted to include. So I went for What Sweeter Music, partly because it has a very interesting sort of backstory to it, as to how the text came about and the historical context of it. So it's partly about telling stories. For example, I Saw Three Ships, which may not be a carol that everyone thinks of as their favourite or whatever, but it's quite well known. You know, the connection with the wise men and Cologne Cathedral and the tombs of the wise men, and all, it's fascinating.
I must say, reading that one, I saw it and was like, oh yeah, this one, I'm not too sure, because it kind of alludes to Christmas, but it's not, Anyway, but as I was reading it, and especially the bit where you're saying how, because it's a little bit vague, you can actually read all sorts of other interpretations and things into it. Then I started getting interested. I was like, oh yeah, actually, there might be something to this. So yeah, that's helped give me a fresh insight into that song. So thank you.
Well, no, thank you. That's that's great. That's the kind of intention. So I mean, there isn't a carol in there I don't like, but what's not to like, as they say.
Yeah.
It is a kind of best hits book. That's the kind of intention. And let me say, it wasn't my idea to write it. The publishers suggested doing it. I've written on carols before, and I write on hymns a lot. And hymns is my world, really. And I do like carols, and I do find this thing about carols telling a story and revealing a theology that people sometimes gloss over. So I think it's about rediscovering it. Same about classical music, actually, as well. Classic FM and the radio, playing requiems and masses all the time, and no one ever explains what a requiem is. Fauré, the anniversary of Fauré's death is this year. In fact, at the time we're speaking, it was only a couple of days ago. But Fauré's requiem is very, very popular. But how many people know what a requiem is? And how many people have a sense of what Fauré did with that requiem in terms of the way he set the text and the bits he left out and so on? Yeah, I think that's all fascinating. And I think we need to reclaim the Christian heritage of some of our music and our hymns. We need to reclaim, because it's a wonderful teaching aid and a wonderful spiritual gift.
Wonderful. That's great. We'll be back chatting with Gordon about his faith and his life after this. But why don't we get a discussion going? We're talking about favorite Christmas carols. So if there's a comment section on the app or the platform that you're listening to this on, why don't you comment in there as to what your favorite Christmas carol is, and then we'll see what everyone else says. Or, of course, you can hop over onto Facebook and search for the Christian Book Blurb podcast and put your comments on there as well. Let's see whose favorite Christmas carols match other people's. That'll be really good fun. So do join us after the break. We'll be chatting a little bit more with Gordon Giles to keep supporting Christian books and authors. Hello, welcome back to the Christian Book Blurb podcast. I am chatting all things Christmas carols with the author Gordon Giles, and we've been chatting about his book, A Calendar of Carols, just before this break. But on this part of the podcast, Gordon, we like to get to know the author a little bit better. And so let's ask, well, I don't know how revealing these questions are, but they're a bit of fun anyway. let's start with Christmas. Why not? Seeing as it's a special Christmas episode, what are some of your favourite things to do at Christmas time?
Go to church.
You've ticked that one off.
I say that not as one of the many people who perhaps only goes at Christmas. I go to church a lot at Christmas. I lead a lot of services. I sing a lot of carols. But I love it, I have to say, because it's not just the content of Christmas, if you like. It's the fact there's a lot of people. I work in a cathedral, and Christmas Eve, the queuing. I think last year we actually had to turn people away, which is very sad in its own kind of way. And when people, when 1,000 people get singing Hark the Herald, it gladens your heart. It does. It certainly does. So I love the worship at Christmas. Because the devil may have the best tunes, but Christmas has some of the best hymns.
That's good. And I like to ask people about some of their favourite things, but I'm going to put a Christmas slant on it this time. We talked about Advent calendars at the very beginning of this episode, and we said how some of them can be all weird and wonderful. You can get coffee ones, and you can get all sorts, knitting ones, and all sorts of different kinds of Advent calendars these days. If you didn't have to worry about how much it costs, what kind of Advent calendar might you like to have this year?
You just say one that's just full of money. I don't want money, but you know what I mean. But you just sowed a thought in my head: is that you could just have an advent calendar with a £50 note in each day, couldn't you? That would be quite fun. But I think that would be very boring. But I think a lot of people would like one of those. But of course, money is the root of all evil. Of course, as is probably every other advent calendar, because there aren't many advent calendars that don't make you fat. I did have a coffee one once. That was quite interesting.
Okay.
It was quite fun. Every day you opened the day, and there was a coffee pod, for the old coffee machine type thing, and you didn't know what you were getting. And of course, it was very, very annoying when it came out and it was decaffeinated coffee, because that's the one thing we do not want is a decaffeinated Christmas. You see, we want the full fat, full Jesus Christmas. We don't want to take anything out. But the coffee's quite fun. There is a port advent calendar which one can get. You have a glass of port.
I was going to say, what about whiskey? Port, okay. Yeah.
Well, I think whiskey every night or every morning. Gosh, presumably have to be an evening advent calendar, wouldn't it?
Yeah, probably.
But I think a whiskey one could be a bit dangerous, couldn't it? Especially since Christmas is kind of my month on, as it were.
Well, yeah.
A little glass of port, that could work quite well. And of course, you can have white port and pink port and ruby port and vintage port.
All sorts, yeah.
Yes, you could. Port would be quite fun. Miniature, But of course, that's communion wine is basically port as well, isn't it? So
when you're not busy in the cathedral, what do you do for fun and relaxation?
I write books.
It's your therapy, is it?
Well, to some extent, I do love writing and researching. That is, people say, how do you find time to do this? I say, well, actually, I really enjoy doing it. I love learning, and I think being a lifelong learner, I think is something we're all called to do. But I have my wife and I have two Shih Tzu dogs, Leo and Lexi. They are great bundles of joy. They're lazy, of course, and if it's raining, they don't want to go out and things like that. And they're not really proper dogs because they'll sit on your lap and they don't go for proper walks. But they are lovely companions, and we do love our dogs. And I like to go walking, like to just get out and about, really. But what's interesting about being a residentiary canon in a cathedral is the word residentiary. I don't get out much. My job is to be here, because we're a cathedral that are open to the public, free of charge. We're very committed to not charging people. All sorts of people come in during the day. They come in for different reasons. They come to admire the architecture. They come to hear the music, maybe. They come to visit the shop, maybe. They come to go to the cafe and have a cup of coffee and cake in the crypt, which I highly recommend. Or they come in because they are searching for something, or they come in because they're in distress or need. And the role of a residentiary canon, and there are basically two of us here who are sort of full-time residentiary canons, and we have the dean as well, is to be on hand, to be on call, sort of almost half the time. And so I can be summoned over to talk to somebody, which of course is a huge privilege. People in their hour of need just sort of wander in and say help to some extent. We have chaplains as well who help, so we're providing a real pastoral thing there. But it does mean that apart from my day off, I can't leave, really. It's a busy life in a cathedral. We do lots of things here that we don't just have acts of worship, but we have 3 of those a day, at least. But we are doing events and concerts, and we have a light show, we have a jazz festival, we have lots of things going on which bring people in. And this is part of our mission. We have a light show, and when people come in, and it's amazing kind of Sonne Luminaire type experience, and then people come back at Christmas. And these are doorways in, and we talk to many people who come in and say, "Oh, I didn't know I was allowed in here," or "I've never been in here before. I've lived in we're in Medway in Kent, lived in Medway all my life, and have never been in here." And we think, well, this is the coalface now. It's about inviting people in who feel this is they've never been welcome before. And we're a Benedictine foundation, which takes us all the way back to the 6th century, and hospitality and welcome is a key aspect of Benedictine spirituality. And we just say, come in, you're welcome. You don't have to pay. We have to pay the bills in other ways, of course. Running a cathedral is not a cheap occupation.
Cheap, no.
Employ staff and all that. But we're very committed that people can just come in and meet God on their terms to some extent. And they can just come in and be quiet.
That's wonderful, and I hope Christmas is a really blessed time for you guys at Rochester Cathedral as well. I'm just talking about you having this love of writing, and it's something you do for fun in a way. Have you got anything coming up soon that you can tell us about? Is there a little book or something on the boil in the background?
This is not, the Calendar Carols is not the only book I've got coming out this Christmas. There is a book about hymns called Sing to the Lord. It's published by the RSCM, and that comes out, as we sit here now, it's not quite out, but I think it's going to be out for Christmas. It's not a Christmas book. It has 1 or 2 carols in it, and there's no overlap with this book, I have to say. I was very keen not to have an overlap. It takes you through the whole year, really, and that's got 30 reflections in it, and it's also got the music, the printed music. You can put the book on the piano and play it if you want. Reflections on hymns. So I've got another book like that coming out at the same time, which is it's a coincidence, really, because this other book is actually been 20 years in the making. It's a collection of things I've been writing over a long time, distilled for this purpose. So there's another book coming out next week. But actually, at the moment, I'm just confining myself to being the editor of New Daylight, for which I also contribute some reflections. New Daylight is a daily reading magazine, I suppose. Just sort of 385 words a day. That's what we say to our authors. And Matt, you have written for it. You know.
Yes, I do.
And if you write 390, I will frown at you. So it's a little book, Bible passage and a reflection. And this has been going for decades. It's very popular and much loved, I think. And we have about 40 authors. I think it's maybe that many, but there's a lot of authors who contribute maybe once a year, but it all adds up to people writing for a week or a fortnight on a Bible chunk, if you like, or sometimes a theme. And I enjoy doing that. I enjoy editing it. I mean, it's very good for my own personal development and growth. I mean, I think people often overlook that, but as an editor and as a writer, it's a learning. I learn so much from what other people write.
That's great. Thanks, Gordon. Where can we find you on social media? Are you on social media and things like that? And where can we buy your books?
Well, all good booksellers, that's what they say, isn't it? I mean, you can buy them online. In one sense, the book published by the RSCM would be available on the RSCM website, and the books published by the Bible Reading Fellowship will be available on the Bible Reading Fellowship website. It probably is my duty and my joy to point you in those directions. But of course, other booksellers are available, and sometimes the pricing is different, let's say, as well. Let the reader understand. But they are out there, they are available. I think Calendar Carols is also available on Kindle, if you like to read on something electronic where the battery doesn't fail. Yes, so they are available. Social media is an interesting one. I've been on Twitter for a long time, RevGJG, but I was never on Facebook. I always avoided Facebook until I came to Rochester Cathedral, and it was during COVID. I moved here during COVID. It's a very strange time to leave a parish in North London after 17 years and not say goodbye. That was very odd. No farewell, none of that. And I arrived here in Rochester, where I am now, and the cathedral was closed. Nobody was allowed in. It was a very strange thing. I was a week after I got here, we did open the doors and people started coming back. And so we've had then probably about 2 years of strangeness. But initially, I then realised that the cathedral was basically operating online. We were doing live streaming services. We started doing that. We became a testing centre. We did all kinds of interesting things and hopefully helpful things. But everything was online. So I joined Facebook. This is why I'm telling this story. I thought I've got to join Facebook. So I did. But I joined not in my own name, but as Canon Chancellor, which is my job title. So, friends, if you want to be my friend, you've got to find Canon Chancellor. You will not find me under my name. I may yet regret this, but nevertheless, I do Facebook in the name of my role, and I do so on behalf of the cathedral. But of course, I sometimes do my own thing as well. So that's a very long-winded answer to what should have been a simple question.
I like stories. It's great. Yeah, wonderful. That's great. Well, Gordon, it's been a real pleasure chatting to you today, all about your book and carols and music and things. It's been great. Thank you so much for joining us.
Not at all. I wish everybody a happy Christmas.
Yes, and a Merry Christmas to you, Gordon, as well. And thank you as well to our listeners for joining us today and for listening to this podcast. Don't forget that comes out twice a month on the 1st and the 15th. So we'll be back on New Day with a brand new episode where I'll be chatting with another Christian author all about their books, their lives, and their faith. Thanks for joining me, and I look forward to the pleasure of your company again really soon. Thank you. Goodbye. Thanks for listening to Christian Book Blurb with your host, Matt McChlery. Do give it a like, give it a share, and let your friends know all about it. We do hope to see you again soon on another Christian Book Blurb.